Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing my dreaded November wrap-up, and I say dreaded because I read so much in the month of November and it's a lot to talk about. I ended up reading a total of 29 things. I think I read 16 novels and then the rest were all comics. So I'm going to start with the novels. There's like no intro because this is going to be a lot to talk about. So let's go. So first I read The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This is a new romance novel that I got the hopes of reading it around Halloween, and I ended up reading it like a couple of days afterward, which was fine. I thought it was really fun. It takes place in this small town and we're following a main character who goes through a breakup with this guy who she thinks is like the love of her life, and she is very upset, so she ends up getting drunk with her cousin and putting a curse on him, but she doesn't think that it's going to be like a real curse because she didn't totally mean it and they didn't have like authentic supplies, like she used a Bath & Body Works candle. But flash forward, and the guy has to come back to the town in order to like do something to revamp their ley lines, and as soon as he gets back he's just met with like incredibly bad luck. So it turns out that the curse did work, and then the two of them have to team up in order to try to break the curse so that he won't be unlucky anymore. And they obviously realize that they both still have feelings for each other. She's obviously very much resisting since they did break up quite a while ago. They both have like a different kind of memory of the breakup. He's very much like of the mindset that she broke up with him and he always like remembered her fondly, and she like hates him but really still loves him. So it was really cute. I liked all of like the witchy stuff in it. I didn't think that it was like super memorable. It definitely is not something that I've really thought about at all since I finished it, but I did enjoy it while I was reading it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Then I read Glass Houses by Rachel Kane. This is the first book in the Morganville Vampire series. Me, my friends Alexa, Rachel, and DJ read it as part of our paranormal book club. This was our pick for the end of the year, I think. I did not like this book. I listened to the audiobook. The main character, Claire, made some of the worst decisions of like any protagonist ever. She was so frustrating and I did not like reading from her point of view. It was also kind of weird because she was like 16 but super smart, so she graduated really early and she was in college with all of these people who are older than her, and then she ends up living in this house with like older men. Yeah, it wasn't for me. I ended up finishing it because one of our friends really liked it and gave it 4 stars, so I kept thinking like it has to get better. So I kept listening, and I ended up giving it 1.5 stars. I really did not like it. Every time that I was going to listen to it, I was kind of like, ugh. And Andrew kept being like, why don't you just stop reading that book? And I was like, I can't, I have to finish it. And that was a mistake. I should have DNF'd it. This was kind of a waste of my time. But then I read The Return of the King by Tolkien. This is the 3rd book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I read it with the intention of doing the live show on Beautifully Bookish Bethany's channel. I did the live show with them for 2 Towers and it was so much fun. Unfortunately, wasn't able to make it the day of the live show. Nothing like terrible, but I really was not feeling good that day. So I ended up just watching the live show and participating via comments, which was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I like kind of still got to be included in the discussion even though I wasn't like physically there, if that makes sense. But I really love this book. Obviously Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite series ever, and it was really nice to wrap it up. One of my goals this year was to reread the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and not only did I reread the trilogy, I also reread The Hobbit, and I was really unconvinced that I was actually going to reread it, but the live shows pushed me to do it. So I'm really thankful that Bethany organized those, because I think I probably would have been like, oh, I'll do it next year, since it was already October when I started them. I feel like every time that I reread Lord of the Rings, I go into it thinking that they're like so long and they're gonna take me so much time to read, and then they're so much shorter than I expected. Absolutely love this one. Gave this one 5 stars. No surprise there. Then I read Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson, and I actually listened to this one on audiobook and I loved it. It was so good. It takes place like right after the events of the first book, and there is a trial going on for the fallout of the first book. When we start this book, Pip has kind of given up her investigative tendencies because of what happened in the last book. She doesn't really want to get involved in anything anymore, but someone comes to her because their brother is missing and basically begs her to try to help them find the brother, and she ends up deciding to do a second season of the podcast, trying to help them find Jamie Reynolds. And there were still ties to the first case within this one. I really, really enjoyed it. There were parts of the book where I was listening and gasping. There was one phone call especially where my heart was beating like crazy because I was oh my god, no, oh my god, no. And it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Then I read These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan, and this is another one that I absolutely loved. I was so pleasantly surprised by this book. It kind of reminded me of The Cruel Prince. It's about fairies. We're following a character named Bree who absolutely hates fairies. Her mom ran away with a fairy when she was young and left her and her sister Jazz to try to fend for themselves, and they've been paying off their debt ever since and working really grueling jobs in order to just get by. Bree's sister Jazz ends up getting purchased by the king of the Unseelie court, so Bree heads into Fairy to try to save her sister, and she ends up getting involved in this war between the courts, between the Seelie and the Unseelie, and it was so good. I just loved it. You didn't really know who you could trust throughout the whole book, and it made for a really engaging read. I really liked the characters. I thought the writing style was a lot of fun. There was a lot going on. I had a lot of feelings for all of the characters, which is always important to me while I'm reading. I wouldn't say it's not the best book ever, but it was a great time reading it, and I loved it. I'm so excited for the next book, but also devastated that I have to wait so long because the ending, wow. And yeah, I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars as well. So I had a couple of really good reads this month, and this was definitely one of my favorites. Then I read Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, and this book was just a firm reminder that Claudia Gray writes my favorite Star Wars novels. She is just a master. She's so good at it. And this story follows Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan is Qui-Gon's Padawan, for those who don't know, and they just have completely different styles, so it's really fun to get more insight into the pair of them and to see them teamed up together, because Qui-Gon is constantly breaking rules and questioning everything within the Jedi Order, and Obi-Wan is very follow the rules kind of guy. It's also just so heartwarming to get their inner dialogue, because Qui-Gon constantly feels he's failing Obi-Wan as a master, and Obi-Wan constantly feels he's failing Qui-Gon as a Padawan. So it was really heartwarming. And then in the book, Qui-Gon actually gets an invitation to join the Jedi Council, and he is debating doing so, but then him and Obi-Wan get sent on this mission that should go very smoothly, but obviously things go very wrong, and it ends up being a lot more involved than they initially thought. And I really loved it, and I also gave this book 4.5 stars. Then I read Lords of the Sith by Paul S. Kemp. This one is a book about the villains, which is kind of fun because a lot of the books focus on the good guys, which is also fun. But this was really fun because our main characters were Vader and Palpatine. And in this one, the pair of them head to Ryloth in order to kind of squash the growing rebellion there, because Ryloth is a really important planet to the Empire because they manufacture spice, as well as something else. Now it's escaping me. So you know it's important when Vader and Palpatine are the ones that are actually heading there personally to make sure that everything goes as planned. And then also we're largely following Cham Syndulla, who is Hera from Star Wars Rebels' father. He's actually the one who is leading the rebel movement on Ryloth, which is the planet that is full of Twi'leks. The Free Ryloth movement gets wind of Palpatine and Vader coming to Ryloth. They end up planning an assassination attack, because if they can take out Vader and Palpatine, that would be a major blow to the Empire. But keep in mind, this is a book about the villains, so obviously things are not going to go exactly as planned for Cham, unfortunately. but it still was like an exciting read. I thought it was a lot of fun. It wasn't my favorite Star Wars read, but I did enjoy it and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Most Wanted by Ray Carson, and this was actually my first Ray Carson book that I've ever read, so it's funny that it ended up being a Star Wars book. This book is a prequel story to the film Solo. It follows Kira and Han on Corellia. Both of them are kind of working in the seedy underbelly of like the criminal underworld. Both of them get offered the same promotion if they can get this mission to go the way that their boss wants. But obviously things go horribly wrong, and then Kira and Han actually end up having to team up to try to smooth things over. And I thought it was fun. Like, there were some cute moments between Han and Kira. I love Han as a character, but the Solo era stuff tends to be my least favorite within the Star Wars universe. So entertaining as it wasn't my favorite. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then I read Rebel Rising by Beth Revis, and this one I did really enjoy. So this one follows Jyn Erso, and it details all of the events that occur from when Jyn's mother is killed by the Empire when Jyn is, I think, 8 years old. And it talks about her father getting kidnapped by the Empire, and then it goes through Jin's life living with Saw Gerrera and training under him and like the rebel missions that he goes on, and then eventually Jyn kind of needing to stand on her own 2 feet. And it was so good, like especially the beginning of the book. It actually made me like cry a couple of times. I feel like it packed like a very emotional punch, but that could be because Rogue One is one of my favorite Star Wars movies. I just think it was so brilliantly done, and I have loved Jyn Erso ever since, and to just get more of her and to fully grasp the tragedy that went on early in her life was really nice. I thought this did a really good job of like detailing her story, and I was glad that she got this book. I actually listened to this one on audio and I really loved it, and I gave it 4 stars. And then lastly, in the novel category, which is actually a series of 7 novels, is another Star Wars story. So this is called Star Wars Adventures in Wild Space. There are 7 books in the series. I read all 7 of them in a row, and they're like middle grade stories. So if you're interested, I really would like very highly recommend just binge reading them and like reading them as if they were 1 book versus 7 books, because they're very short and it really does just read like one cohesive story. Like, you cannot read these out of order at all. So we're following a pair of siblings named Milo and Lena, and their parents have been kidnapped by the Empire, kind of like Galen Erso vibes there. So they decide that they have to save their parents, and they head off planet with Crater and their monkey lizard, which is the same species as Salacious Crumb. And in doing so, they're trying to evade Captain Corda, who is working for the Empire, who is trying to find the kids so that they can basically use them to blackmail the parents. Throughout the series, like, each book is its own little adventure, and throughout the series there are a couple of character cameos from characters that we know from Star Wars Rebels, which was really exciting. A couple of bigger names in the Empire show up, and I just thought it was like a really fun series. I'm obviously not the target market for this because this is middle grade, but I did really enjoy it as one cohesive story. But then keeping that in mind, when it comes to ratings, they were mostly a mix of 3 stars or 3.5 stars for me, because each book read more like a chapter in the story to me. So obviously there were going to be some hits and misses, with the exception of 2 books that I rated 4 stars. I think it was The Darkness and The Rescue, if I'm remembering correctly. Okay, and then moving into Star Wars comics. So first I read Star Wars Age of Republic Heroes, and this was just a collection of one-shot issues featuring heroes from the prequel era. So we got a one-shot for Anakin, a one-shot for Obi-Wan, a one-shot for Padme, and a one-shot for Qui-Gon. I really enjoyed these. I ended up giving it 4 stars, but now that I've had a little bit of time away from it, I don't remember too much about the actual stories. And the same actually goes for the next comic that I read, which was Star Wars Age of the Republic Villains. So these were one-shots of the villains that we see in the prequel series. So we had an issue about Darth Maul, an issue about Jango Fett, and this was actually the one that does really stick out in my mind that I still like can like vividly retell the entire story for. I thought the Jango Fett issue was so good. We get an issue for Count Dooku, and then we also get an issue for General Grievous. And I also gave this collection 4 stars. Then I read Dr. Aphra Volume 5, Worst Among Enemies. And in this volume, Dr. Aphra and 000 have had these bombs implanted in them by one of the many people that Dr. Aphra has pissed off in the past during her adventures. 000 or Aphra go too far away from each other, the bombs will detonate, and they only have like 10 hours left until the bombs will go off, so they have to try to like find this doctor who would be able to do surgery and remove the bombs from them. I thought this issue was more fun than the last one that I read. So what happened with Dr. Aphra is I thought the first 2 volumes were like, or first 3 volumes, 2 or 3 volumes were like so good, and then they had a writer change. I feel like the quality just never got back to like that first volume that I really loved. So while this one was better than the previous one that I had read, it still wasn't like a favorite for me, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 7, Ashes of Jedha, and this one I really liked. In this issue, the rebellion heads to Jedha to try to protect the planet from the Empire, who's going to try to reap, I believe it's like Kyber crystals that they're after. But the planet is definitely on the decline, and there are people there that are pretty much just hanging on in order to keep the Empire away. Like, they have that mentality of like, if we can't have it, then no one can, which makes sense when it comes to the Empire, but like, they're much more violent than the rebellion. And while they're there, Luke is kind of torn between his responsibilities as a member of the rebellion versus his desire to understand what it is to be a Jedi. I really liked the art in this one. I feel like the planet Jedha is just so gorgeous, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 8, Mutiny at Mon Cala, and in this one, Luke, Leia, and Han head to Mon Cala in order to try to forge an alliance with the planet, but things end up not going in their favor, and they end up planning this ridiculous but so entertaining mission. I found this whole story arc to just be like so much fun, and I feel like there were some very stressful moments, but I was laughing through so much of it because it was just such an entertaining situation. We got to see a character pop up that we had known from earlier in the comics, and I just love this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 9, Hope Dies. This was probably the most exciting story arc of any of the story arcs in the Star Wars main title comics so far. It mostly takes place in space, and it shows the Empire sabotaging the rebellion. And there's even a point where Han has to face off with Vader. It was just so great. It's leading up to Empire Strikes Back, so the story arc is called Hope Dies. So I'm sure that you can see where this is going, but it was just so well done, and I gave this one 5 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 10, The Escape. In this one, Han, Leia, and Luke spend most of their time on this planet called Cuban. They're learning all about the culture of this place, and it's really, really fascinating. In the beginning, I was a little bit unconvinced that I was going to like it, but then the story takes quite a turn, and I ended up really loving this volume. We meet a couple of new characters that I really enjoyed, and I'm really hoping that one of them will pop up again in the Star Wars comics. I gave this arc 4.5 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 11, The Scourging of Shu Torun. So in this one, the rebellion is getting ready to strike back against the Empire after the events of Hope Dies. They've kind of like regrouped, and now they're ready to go. Again, really, really loved this one. Hell hath no fury like Leia Organa scorned. I gave this story arc 4.5 stars. Then I read Dr. Aphra Volume 6, Unspeakable Rebel Superweapon, and the reason that I'm going like that this seems like a weird order is because I read them in canon order, so that's why there's like Star Wars, then Dr. Aphra, then Star Wars again, then Dr. Aphra again. I wanted to read the story like in the correct timeline. So this was kind of like a basic Dr. Aphra story. She was back getting into her usual mischief, being shady, trying to make money. So yeah, it was fine, but it wasn't anything like great, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I read Dr. Aphra Volume 7, A Rogue's End. I finally enjoyed this story more than the previous volumes of Dr. Aphra, and in this one we kind of see her back where she started, and I think the reason that I liked it so much is just because, and the reason why I like the early ones is because I really like the dynamic between Dr. Aphra and Vader. I think it's really fun, and I gave this arc 4 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 12, Rebels and Rogues, and this is the first volume in the Star Wars mainline titles where Jason Aaron is no longer writing them. Greg Pak took over for these last 2 volumes. So in this one, Chewbacca and C-3PO get sent to this planet in order to essentially destroy it. It's like a desolate planet, to try to get the attention of the Empire, get them to go there and then potentially like destroy them. But the planet ends up being inhabited by a pretty unlikely species. Then we kind of get Return of the Jedi vibes, and you'll know what I mean if you read this volume. It was fun, but it definitely was not as good as Jason Aaron's stories in my opinion, and I gave this one 3 stars. Then I read Star Wars Volume 13, which is Rogues and Rebels, not to be confused with Volume 12, which is Rebels and Rogues. This is the final volume in the series, and this is the last Star Wars main title volume that takes place like directly before Empire Strikes Back, and then Star Wars gets rebooted with a new issue 1. It started in 2020 and Charles Soule has taken over writing it, and it's the events that take place right after Empire Strikes Back leading up to Return of the Jedi, and that story run is still ongoing at the moment, and I think I have like 1 or 2 volumes of that to read so far, and I'm pretty excited to do so. Charles Soule probably writes my favorite comics within the Star Wars universe, and Claudia Gray writes my favorite books. Definitely excited that he took over the main title. But back to Rogues and Rebels. This volume basically is just like the lead up where the rebels are looking for a new base and they end up landing on Hoth, and we see the rebellion stationed there once Empire Strikes Back begins. And this was fun. Again, liked it, didn't love it, gave it 3 stars. And then finally, the last Star Wars comic that I read was Target Vader. This is a 6-issue story arc, and we're mainly following the Imperial officer Valance, who's been hired to assassinate Darth Vader. So he teams up with some of these bounty hunters very reluctantly. He likes to work alone, but he's kind of forced into working with all of them, but he's definitely like the lead. And it's really just about him trying to get Vader. There's a whole lot of action in this series. There really wasn't much plot, and there weren't many character moments in my opinion. I thought this one was fine. I think if you like action, you'll probably like it, but this definitely wasn't my favorite. I gave this one 3 stars. And that's finally it. I read a lot in November. I'm almost hoping to read less in December just so that I don't have to do such a long wrap up, which is very silly, but my voice is going. So that's everything. Lots of Star Wars stuff. Made a lot of progress on my canon reading list, which is very exciting. Let me know some of the things that you read this month, and also thank you if you made it to the end. I know that I probably have less of an audience for people who are into the Star Wars comics, since that kind of is like a very deep dive into the Star Wars canon universe. But I think that they're a lot of fun and they're worth reading. And I think I want to make a video at some point of like the best ones to read, because I should be caught up on Star Wars comics, like all of them, kind of soon, and I'm pretty excited about it. So hopefully you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on those. But that's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!